Hi, everyone. This is Kirsten Brierly, Director of Communications for the NWSL. Before we go over some housekeeping items, I do want to introduce our speakers that we have here today. With us, we have Commissioner Jessica Berman of the NWSL, Meghann Burke, Executive Director of the NWSL Players Association, and the two lead investigators from the Joint Investigative Team, Amanda Kramer from Covington and Ariana Scovetti from Weil. Before I turn it over to them for opening remarks, I just want to mention that when we get to the Q&A section, to either use the raise your hand function or the Q&A function, and I will unmute you to ask your question. Please introduce yourself with your name and your publication, and it would be greatly appreciated if you direct your questions to the relevant speaker. With that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Berman for opening remarks.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the culmination of 14 months of incredibly hard work, not only by the people who are sitting here today, but all of the people who cooperated with this investigation, and in particular, the players who bravely came forward to share their stories and offered us an opportunity to use this moment in time as an inflection point to rebuild trust and regain the confidence in the future of the league. This investigation was really unprecedented, and as a labor lawyer and someone who took this role 7 months ago, we've talked a lot about how it's unprecedented in 3 ways. The first being that it is very expansive in scope, dating back to the original year of the league in 2012 through the present. It is also an independent investigation that was overseen by an oversight committee, which we'll talk about more, I'm sure, in the context of questions. And the third being that it was joint. It was joint with the Players Association, and you'll hear from Meghann Burke momentarily, but one of the really teachable moments for me as a labor lawyer is the opportunity for us to learn so much from not just this report and the fact-finding, but from the process, and to really reset the tone of what it means to have a constructive labor relationship. Meghann Burke is the fiercest advocate I've ever worked with, who day in and day out advocates on behalf of players. And my role is, of course, to represent the league. Yet we found a way to work collaboratively on this process and to ensure that we put the future of the league first. And there were 3 goals for this investigation. The first was fact-finding, the second was corrective action, and the third is systemic reform. We always knew we had to start with the facts and we have to face down the truth. That's what this moment is. This report was released 2 hours ago. We do not expect that those who have joined us today on this press conference have read and digested the report. We would ask you to recognize we too need time to digest the report, and there's a lot we'll be able to talk about today. And as we go forward, we'll all be able to gain additional insight about how we can grow the league. And we look forward to continuing our approach, which is to listen and learn and identify ways that we can support the interest of the players as we build the league and unlock the potential of the future of the NWSL. I'll turn it over to Meghann.
Thank you, Jessica. This report speaks to the power of the players in the NWSL, to the power of the truth, and the power of a strong labor union. Players have willed this moment into existence, and the NWSL Players Association would like to thank, honor, and acknowledge every player, whether known or unknown, identified or not in this report, for speaking truth to power. Players who lent their names to this report know a kind of courage that's hard to understand. Our continued commitment as a labor union is to never stop bringing about the change that these players deserved. We would also like to thank Ariana Scovetti and Weil and her team for their passionate commitment to seeking the truth. Weil's reputation and commitment to representing labor unions and athletes served us well in this unprecedented process. Thank you, too. We're going to talk in a minute about Terry Jackson of the NWSLPA and Judge Barbara Jones and Janaba Parker for their important contributions to this work on the Oversight Committee. As Jessica pointed out, this type of investigation, to my knowledge, has never been done before. It stands alone, not just in American sports, but on the labor landscape. When we set about this joint investigation, we sought to identify what was broken so we could actually fix it in the interest of protecting the players, our central mission. Through our own representatives as a labor union, we have stared down hard, unfiltered truths in order to develop evidence-based recommendations that will put player safety at the center of a transformed league. We sought the truth, and now transparency and accountability are necessary for reform. It's going to take all of us, players, fans, teams, sponsors, partners, media, and the league, doing our part to make this league what we know it can be. Our task now as a labor union is twofold. First, to hold NWSL leadership accountable to the promises it makes, and I know that they expect that. And two, to empower the next generation to know and understand our collective history, that this work will be unrelenting from generation to generation. The work will never end, but we sincerely hope that our collective healing can begin. And with that, I will turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Meghann. It has been a tremendous honor for all of us here at Covington to lead this truly meaningful and groundbreaking joint investigation. We are grateful to Arianna Scavetti and her colleagues for their teamwork and collaboration. On behalf of the Joint Investigative Team, I'll note a few points. This is a detailed, lengthy report that recounts specific incidents and covers a considerable amount of evidence, which we cannot fully capture in brief remarks and responses. While we'll do our best to answer your questions, there are certain questions we may not be able to answer. For example, we will not answer questions that may reveal the identity of players who did not consent to be named, as we remain steadfast in our commitment to protect their confidentiality and respect their autonomy. We hope that our report will help the players, the league, and its clubs move forward as they work together to ensure that players are safe, secure, and empowered. I'll turn it over to Arianna.
Thanks, Amanda. On behalf of the Weil team, I'd like to say that it's been a privilege for us to represent the players and the Players Association throughout this process. I'd also like to thank Amanda Kramer and the Covington team, whose wealth of expertise in workplace culture investigations were critical to making this a thorough and comprehensive investigation. On behalf of the Joint Investigative Team, we would like to extend our gratitude to everyone who spoke with us as part of this process. An incredible number of players shared their stories with us, even when they were difficult, painful, and deeply personal. The strength of this report is that it is anchored in the lived experience of players through the years, and we know that would not have been possible without so many people trusting us with their stories. We're very thankful.
Okay, with that, I will open it up for questions. We will start with Meredith Cash. Let me unmute her. Here we go.
This is Meredith Cash from Insider. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure who to direct this question to. I assume Meghann and Jessica here, but I wanted to ask about the timing of the release of this report. Who was responsible for that decision, and were you aware that it came out at the exact same time as the kickoff of the World Cup semifinal today?
Sure, I'll answer first and then turn it over to Jessica. Well, I'll start by saying that while I was born and raised in the sport, and the World Cup is, of course, an important life moment for everyone. I have been singularly focused personally on the players I represent, which means I've missed a good number of World Cup games. And I will confess that we even scheduled an important player readout to conflict with yesterday's semifinal and moved it to accommodate that. The report needed to be released when it was finished, and it was finished, and it needed to be released. We also did not want the players to have to head into the holiday season with this looming over them. And I think we cut it about as close as we possibly could. So while we certainly, it's unfortunate. I missed the game myself, which is unfortunate for all of us in this room, but we've been working hard 24/7 to get this report out. And, you know, I apologize to all the journalists for that conflict, but we hope that you'll spend the next few days digesting this really important piece of work.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the release date was directly determined by the completion of the report. Once we realized that it was substantially complete, we selected a date. There was no time where we took that date and checked the World Cup schedule. And I share Meghann's sentiment. It's unfortunate to see the commentary around that, because I hope that people will take the time to recognize that this is really a brave and courageous moment for the players and for us collectively to face the truth and to heal and to move forward. And that really has been our singular focus.
Thank you both. We will go to Jonathan Tannenwald.
Thank you, Kirsten. Can you all hear me?
Yep, can hear you now.
Thank you. One for Meghann and one for Ariana. The first one is to Meghann. You've spoken about a need for accountability in your opening remarks. There are public figures in positions of this power named in this report. Are there specific people around the league who you feel need to go? And then the question for Ariana, if I can ask it, and then you guys can both answer, and then I'll get out of the way. The public has made, as you know well, a lot of noise about this investigation and about all the scandals that have happened. How much of your work and approach incorporated a desire to earn the public's trust in what is contained in this report?
I think I'll answer first, and then I'll turn it over to Ariana. So I think, and certainly you all have not had an opportunity to review the report in its entirety, but the charge to the Joint Investigative Team was to uncover all of the facts and make recommendations. And then ultimately the decision to impose discipline or take corrective action will rest with our Commissioner, Jessica. What I can tell you that is new for me as Executive Director of the Labor Union is that Jessica and I are in frequent contact and sincerely wants to know what my opinion is or recommendation might be, even though ultimately it's her decision. These facts, I think, will lead us to some pretty clear directives in terms of what disciplinary action needs to be had or corrective action needs to be had. But this report was just released today. We've not had the opportunity to digest it ourselves and consult and confer about what should happen next. And Jessica has not had the opportunity to take that action. I expect that to be forthcoming. But to your point, those facts, I think, require very serious action. We will be expecting that from NWSL. I think that was the entirety of the question. Did I miss a piece of it? I think that's all of it. I'll turn it over to Ariana.
Thanks, Meghann, and thanks, Jonathan. Our focus through this was on earning the players' trust. One of the things that we heard throughout our investigation was that players over the years had developed concerns about whether they could trust the league to respond appropriately to concerns of misconduct if they brought them. And so part of the unique structure of having this joint investigation was to help rebuild that trust by showing that the league is committed to doing right by the players and incorporating the players' views. And that's part of why the league agreed to this joint structure. And so our focus, being in the room and having the Players Association's counsel as part of the process, was really to earn the players' trust in the outcome of the investigation. And of course, with bringing the report out publicly, there are additional benefits to accountability and transparency that also align with the findings of the report about how those help ensure that the league is safer for players. But our foremost priority throughout this process was earning the players' trust.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Jeff Carlisle.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay, great. I mean, kind of following on from Jonathan's question, my question is for Jessica. I mean, how important is it that there is discipline or, like you said, accountability for the people mentioned in this report? And I'm thinking specifically of owners. I mean, at this stage, a lot of the coaches are no longer in the league. So, you know, how important is that piece?
We've always said that it's a critical component. I think in order to build trust and confidence in the league and the seriousness with which we need to address these issues, we had to face the truth. We had to determine appropriate corrective action, and we had to institute culture and systemic reform. And as Meghann stated earlier, we intend to address all of those things in turn. And now that the report is released, it will be our utmost priority to review the findings and determine what the appropriate next steps should be.
Thank you. Next, we'll go Jeff Kassouf.
Thank you all for taking the time. Sorry, it says I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Just two questions, if I could. One I would think is for either of Meghann or Jessica. Firstly, there's we understandably a lot of anonymous sort of stories from players and others in this, and some of them include misconduct of coaches or staff members. And I'm just wondering if those identities are known to you on some sort of internal level, and if they are, you know, as part of the alluding to some of the recommendations, if there's some sort of a central way of pooling that information or tracking that for teams going forward. And then just separately, I think maybe more to the legal side, or secondly, just wondering if you could comment on U.S. Soccer's, or more specifically the Yates Report's role, how it affected positively or negatively this report. There's a mention of, at least in one case with Christy Hawley, canceling an interview after he read the Yates Report is how it read. And then U.S. Soccer is mentioned in this report as at times withholding information until after the Yates Report, and that sort of contradicts a statement they just released. So wondering if you could comment on how that report and its release affected this one. Thank you.
I'll take the first question and then defer to the investigators on the second question. As it relates to your first question, to be clear, we will not be seeking the identities of players who do not wish to be identified. Part of the system that we are putting in place is to respect the anonymity of players who feel more comfortable coming forward in an anonymous, unidentified manner. So that's first and foremost. As it relates to individuals who are named or not named as being part of any alleged misconduct, we have requested from the Joint Investigative Team a list of any individuals who are not named so that we can determine what, if any, follow-up steps need to be taken.
I'll take the second question. First, I think how the Yates Report impacted this investigation and our report, we took into account the findings in the Yates Report when it was issued and explored additional avenues for investigation. And while you correctly cited one example where a witness declined to be interviewed, canceled an interview that was scheduled after the Yates Report came out, we also had the other experience, which is that some people who had not participated in either investigation chose to then come forward and speak with us or provide documents to us. U.S. Soccer was asked to provide documents and information to our Joint Investigative Team the same way that the Yates investigation asked the league and other entities to provide documents and information. And there was delay in some of the materials that were produced by U.S. Soccer by separate counsel other than King and Spalding. So, the investigations both existed in parallel for some period of time. And, we're grateful to be part of this moment in time where there are, uniform and consistent recommendations for change that will have a meaningful impact going forward.
Thanks. We will go to Howard Megdal.
Were put in here. My questions are twofold. First is for Jessica. Obviously, this is a joint report, so it is something that doesn't require mutual buy-in. You guys have already presumably agreed to the principles involved here. There are a significant number of recommendations, of course, that go with it. And just as a practical matter, I wonder what you see as the reasonable time frame for those to be implemented by the league.
Yeah, thanks. I just would love to correct one sort of assumption in your question, which is that neither I nor Meghann approved anything that's in the report, whether it's the characterization of fact-finding or in the context of systemic reform or recommendations. The Joint Investigative Team acted completely independently, and to the extent we were consulted, it was on the basis of when they felt they needed direction or input. As it relates to the timeline for us being able to implement systemic reform and change, we at the league first and foremost recognize that there's a lot to digest in this report, and we need to take the time to really review it, analyze and compare it to any systems that have already been put in place, get feedback from key stakeholders, including players, the Player Association, and other subject matter experts who we will engage, such as an advisory council, to ensure that we're getting the perspectives of people with expertise outside of the people who work at the league office. And all of those steps are underway. We have, as detailed in our press release from earlier today, taken steps already to begin that process. So there are changes that have already been implemented in the 2022 season, and there are changes that have been in the works since the 2022 season began that would be contemplated for implementation for 2023, all the while knowing that we may need to pivot based on what we learn in this report and from additional input that we seek. So the real answer to your question is that we expect to have meaningful systemic reform in place for the 2023 season.
Thanks. Next, we'll go to Dan Laletta.
A question for about the dash segment. Number one, it still doesn't necessarily seem clear why James Clarkson had from April until today without really having a resolution, where the Pride had the resolution to the Amanda Cromwell scenario and the Rhiannon Wilkinson situation kind of came and went very quickly. So I'm just wondering, what was it about that situation that led it to linger until today?
Sorry, you were breaking up at the beginning of the question. I think you said it was for me, and assuming it was, we always said that we would take action once we had the recommendation or the findings from the Joint Investigative Team, which is now occurred as of today. So we will review those findings and determine next steps.
And then the follow-up to that is the dash statement that they put out. Essentially, sounds like they're hiding behind Clarkson being out of contract in a couple of weeks. Kind of seems similar to the way Paul Riley was dismissed by the Thorns. So I'm wondering if, as the commissioner, you're comfortable with that from the dash as opposed to them taking more of a stand one way or another about the findings.
I haven't seen their actual statement. So it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it. I will say that it'd be hard to imagine that anything is hidden at this point. The undertaking of the Joint Investigative Team was to uncover all the facts, and those facts are now out in the public domain for everybody to see. And so there is nothing that is in a file or not being shared more broadly because it's all contained in the report, which is on display for the public to see.
Thanks. Next, we'll go to Sean McCaffrey.
As well as the Players Association. This league is not exactly new. It went for too long of a time without particular HR things, without non-fraternization policies, everything else. They came to blow up. The owners are not new to business. To the attorneys, there are criminal acts being alleged here, possibly crossing state lines, along lines of trafficking. If I'm doing something wrong to a player, put them on a travel roster and do it in another city. I've not heard much, if anything, about criminal charges on some of these people.
We're obviously not going to comment on anything having to do with criminal charges. The investigation that we conducted jointly and our report reflect the facts and the evidence as we gathered them, and it speaks for itself.
Next, we'll go to Rachel Bachman.
All of you for being here. I think this is for Jessica. Some of this, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this is for Jessica. Some of this report's recommendations go far beyond rules or guidelines in any other league that I know of, and I'll read a few of them just so you know what I'm talking about. Recommendation of widening the league's existing anti-harassment policy to address microaggressions and derogatory language, creating guidelines on appropriate interactions between team staff and players, including responsible drinking at team events and locations of one-on-one meetings, providing guidance to coaches and other staff that it's inappropriate to make degrading comments or jokes about a player's weight. Could you just address how ambitious those steps are in the context of pro sports, which usually don't enumerate these things, and especially in a league trying to grow? And also, do you think drawing such lines will make it difficult to recruit coaches or staff to this league, knowing they might be under more scrutiny in it than they might be elsewhere?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Rachel. And as you know, I've spent most of my career working in other sports and in particular men's sports. And I can say from my experience that the issues that you're referring to that would potentially be addressed through that kind of systemic reform are not unique to the NWSL. Certainly people who have reached out to me in the last 7 months who have suspected the kind of issues that we would be grappling with have asked for our leadership and support in helping them to be proactive so that they don't find themselves in similar circumstances to what has occurred in the NWSL. And we really feel that there's an opportunity for us to lead in this space. And we wouldn't have chosen, of course, to get to this point in time based on all of the past history and the misconduct that occurred. But with those being the facts that are presented and what's been identified in the Joint Investigative Report, we believe there's an opportunity to make not just the NWSL and women's sports better, but the broader sports ecosystem. And it's clear that those are issues and areas and topics that need to be addressed, because without clear guidance, we now know that there will be missteps, and we're going to take responsibility for that as a league. We believe, in terms of the second part to your question, Rachel, on coaches and staff, we believe it's our responsibility to empower coaches and staff with the tools and resources on how to be successful, just like another workplace. And my background is as an employment lawyer. In other workplaces, when you have managers, you provide them with training and education about what you expect of them. And we're going to do that. And part of what was detailed in our press release earlier this afternoon was a very clear commitment to support coaches and staff and make sure that they have those tools and resources proactively to know how to positively motivate people, to know how to give hard feedback. These are things that lots of people struggle with, and many of these coaches, we know from our conversations with them, grew up in environments where this type of emotional misconduct was part of the norm. And if we expect for them to show up differently in their jobs on a day-to-day basis, we need to be proactive in supporting their efforts, and we intend to do that for their benefit and for the players' benefit.
Thanks. Next, we'll go to Steph Young.
This is a question for Commissioner Berman. In the context of this report and the Yates report showing how, unclear hierarchical structures and unclear procedures kind of contributed to bad actors being able to continue operating in the system, and also understanding that there's a need to balance the ability of teams to function somewhat autonomously while being responsible, to a central authority. Do you think there will be, or that there needs to be, a discussion or some kind of renegotiation of the balance between, the board of directors and the commissioner, and by extension, your front office?
Yeah, I think this is a unique work industry, the way that professional sports leagues are structured. And I guess what will make this easier is that, in fact, the way the NWSL is currently set up, we are a single entity. We have the ability to put forward the policies, procedures, and protocols that we expect for teams to follow. We intend to lean into that responsibility while also recognizing that there will be places where it's appropriate for individual teams to have more autonomy. To be clear, given that the players are employees of the league, as it relates to the subject matter in this report, we intend to be very intentional about how we maintain our position as their employer and to put forward the policies that we know are necessary to protect them and to provide a healthy and safe environment for them to optimize their performance.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to John Barr. There we go.
So, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks so much. I appreciate your comments today. And a lot of them have revolved around the process and timing. And I'm just a little more curious about, and I recognize that a number of these allegations have existed for months. Some are new. I'm just curious, Meghann and Jessica, when you digest these words from your players, when they talk about things like a culture of fear, a culture of abuse, a culture of silence, remarks about their weight, shaming because of sexual orientation, racially charged and flat out racist comments. When you digest all of that, and then not to mention sexual misconduct, when you digest all of that, how does that strike you as human beings? Take off your commissioner hat and Players Association head hat for a moment. How does that strike you just as human beings?
Yeah, well, first let me say I appreciate the humanity of your question. We can talk a lot about policies and procedures, but at the end of the day, reading that report is hard. It's a hard reality, and I wouldn't sit here today and say that I could put myself in the player's shoes to know exactly what it feels like. I can say reading those words struck a chord with me, and in talking to other women that I know who have worked in industries that have historically not treated women fairly, it resonates. In particular, for me, I would say the backdrop of the narrative in the report about being grateful for what you have is something that I felt like I was always implicitly and sometimes explicitly told. And it's a hard environment to feel that you can be safe exercising your agency and to feel empowered to give feedback or to raise your hand and say, I need help or something's not right, because you're afraid of the instability of rocking the boat. And so for me as a human, as a woman who has always been ambitious and excelled in various different environments from a work perspective, but also been challenged by the societal constraints, it was hard. It's hard to read, and it's hard to imagine that these types of things still exist, particularly for people who have the privilege of not experiencing it. And I think a lot of the work that's being done right now, we have the benefit of what I hope is a cultural awakening around privilege and a cultural awakening around people trying to understand someone else's perspective. And that's really, at the end of the day, what's going to motivate change, because we need for people to have empathy and recognize that if we want for the NWSL to achieve its potential and to be what it can be, which is the best league in the world, we need to empower our athletes to reach their potential.
Thanks. Next, we'll go. Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry,
I'm happy.
Meghann, go
I don't know
for
if you
it.
wanted me to answer it.
I
but-
would love you to.
Okay, thanks. I'll first of all echo what Jessica said. I certainly appreciate the humanity in that question, and our team has described this week has felt a bit like an unloading or a purging of all of these stories that have been collected over time. It has been an immensely heavy 14 months and really beyond that, 2 years. I took over as executive director on April 1st, 2021, as the first full-time executive director of this Players Association, which is not that long ago, but it feels like we've lived a decade in that time. The weight that our players have had to carry over the generations is heavier than anything I can imagine. And I say that as someone who has defended the accused in the criminal justice system in unimaginable places and times in their lives. Our players they've been a beacon of hope and inspiration in this process. And so our greatest hope is that we've done justice to their stories and their trust, which I do not for a moment take for granted. I've described as difficult as this year, being in this role as the privilege of my professional life, that the players have entrusted us to try to tell their stories. I would encourage anyone reading this report to just use discretion and take care of themselves. We've shared that with the players. You don't have to read it also if it's hard. I'll also say that as a union, and we affiliated with the AFL-CIO as part of this work, we know that the lived experiences of our players are commonly felt by workers in every industry. Our hope truly is that we can provide a roadmap for a better way for not just us, but for anyone in a situation like this. So I thank you for the humanity of that question.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Meg Linehan.
For the delay. I did want to ask both Meghann and Jessica, I think about the role of money moving forward. I think investment and raising standards for ownership seems really crucial, but at the same time, we've seen players harmed over the past 10 years of the league as teams in the league and owners prioritize sustainability and growth over player safety. The CBA will probably play a large role here, but how do you balance investment and growth alongside player safety?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. They're one and the same to me. I mean, we can't build a house on a foundation that doesn't exist. And the momentum and enthusiasm and excitement for the league is the reason that we have to get this right and unlock the potential of this league. And both not only are true, but have to be true. We have to make sure that we pay attention to and mind the environments that we're providing for players to train and play, and ensuring that we're creating environments that are safe and culturally appropriate. And that's going to require investment. Our board understands that. I took this job on the expectation that that would be the case. And in fact, I was told that that's why I was hired. And I think to your question, Meg, if the board felt that the future of the league was going to be skewing towards just focusing on growth and revenue, I don't think they would have hired a labor lawyer whose background is in rebuilding institution and creating operational rigor and professionalism. So I've been given the autonomy to create the world that is appropriate and responsible to be able to achieve the potential that we all know is possible.
And I'd be happy to contribute an answer to that question as well. Quite frankly, in the NWSL, the players are the greatest asset we have, bar none. It's not stadiums, it's not real estate, it's all due respect to our sponsors and potential broadcast partners, it's the players. It's why fans come to games. It's why you watch them on TV. It's why people want to invest, because they are some of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. The way it's been said that the way you make money is to spend money. And so we've got to invest, and it's going to take real dollars in creating systems to put player health and safety at the very center of this league. And I do believe we have the right leadership, both in Jessica and how she's been empowered by the Board of Governors, to move this league forward in a direction that it has always deserved to go. And I think by putting player safety at the center of our future growth plans, we're going to realize our potential as a league.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Lauren Green.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
My question is for Jessica. In light of how often teams have previously announced coaching departures as a mutual parting or resigning, does the league plan to require clubs to be more transparent when coaches are being removed in the future due to a misconduct-related issue?
Yeah, clearly that's one of the takeaways of the report, that it requires further analysis and guidelines for us to be able to work in partnership with our teams to ensure that there's an appropriate amount of transparency in light of the particular facts and circumstances. So that will be one of the things that we are analyzing on a go-forward basis.
Great. We'll take a few more. Next, we'll go to Daniel Sperry.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. This question is for Meghann Burke, Daniel Sperry with the Kansas City Star. It's specifically to speaking to the point about the Kansas City Current and the note about Hugh Williams in the report. Given Hugh is no longer the head coach, but still holds a role within the club, I know we've said that future action is coming, but do you feel that that type of a role is enough of a removal away from first team soccer for someone who had concerns of retaliatory actions about them, especially considering he is in a scouting role and working within the front office and has ties to the Kansas City Current too? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Given that we just received this report, I don't think we're in a position to develop a formal position on what corrective action should be taken relative to really any individual identified in this report. I fear the answer would frankly be incomplete as well. I also will say, though, that one takeaway from this whole process is that reshuffling people who commit misconduct is not the way forward to a safer future. I look forward to Jessica and I having a chance to digest this report and work together to figure out both what systemic reforms and corrective action need to be taken to put player safety at the center of every single team in this league.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Jackie Gutierrez.
Hear me okay? Okay,
Yep.
great. Appreciate you all taking the time. I had a question for each Jessica and Meghann, but I'll start with you, Jessica. It's kind of a twofold here, but just speaking of policies, in the press release, it was stated that the player handbook and some additional policies will be updated. So just wanted to get your thoughts if there was a sort of timeline or deadline of when those policies will be updated. And if so, will those also be displayed on the website along with the anti-harassment policies?
Sure. We've definitely tried to reset the tone in a spirit of transparency. So while I can't commit to every single thing being on display on our website, it's certainly the lens through which we are endeavoring to build trust and credibility for the league, not just with the players, but with media, fans, and external stakeholders. The policies specifically that we called out were the ones that we've been working on at the league office, independent of the Joint Investigative Report's recommendations. And from memory, I think some of the ones that were particularly called out are the non-fraternization policy and the new hire policy as it relates to vetting and background checks. Those are issues and challenges that we knew and know need to be addressed, and we're extremely motivated to get that in place prior to the start of the 2023 season.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Alex Silverman. Should be good now, Alex.
Time to answer our questions. One of the recommendations in the report calls for, increased coordination with U.S. Soccer as it pertains to hiring and sharing information. Obviously, you guys went about investigating this stuff separately, but are you confident that you guys can, effectively work together?
I'll start, and it probably sits with me and my team at the league office. First, I'll say I have a role on the board of U.S. Soccer, and that provides me with an opportunity to directly partner with them. Their new CEO, JT Batson, has been, since he took his role, a really important ally for us, and I am very confident and in his leadership, and that U.S. Soccer overall is prepared to work with us on systemic reform. And as Meghann said in her opening remarks, these are not issues that we can effectuate on our own. I think what's clear in the takeaways from the report are that the systemic culture reform that's required extends far beyond the NWSL, and we will be working closely with U.S. Soccer on those reforms. Their participant safety task force has a representative from the NWSL, in particular, Carlin Hudson, who is a former player who we hired as our director of strategy. We announced her hiring last week. She sits on that participant safety task force, and so she will have a direct line of communication to them and to be able to be the liaison between the NWSL and U.S. Soccer so that we can work together to get this right. We need to, and we will partner to ensure that we are coordinated and addressing the issues that need to be addressed to make sure that our sport is safe and appropriate for players.
We will take one more from Taylor Vincent.
In the report, it stated that the Utah Royals home stadium fans were calling players based off of their race and sexual orientation, and that players didn't really want to play in Utah as a result. If Utah's going to rejoin the NWSL potentially in the future, would there be special requirements for the club to make sure it's a safe place for people to be playing?
I think those types of education and reform need to occur on a league-wide basis and aren't isolated to a particular market. Again, I think if there's one broad takeaway from the report, it's that these challenges and these issues are not isolated. They need to be addressed at a macro level, and any education and training that we implement will be done on a league-wide basis.
Thank you. With that, that will conclude today's press conference. I want to thank Amanda, Jessica, Meghann, and Ariana for being with us today, and for all of the reporters on the line for joining us and asking your questions. We appreciate the time and hope everyone has a great holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.